A lot of radio operators do not understand what radio messaging is fundamentally about. We'll talk about that today on Radio KD8TTE.
Black one, black one.
Some radio operators, having seen things like the radiogram, wonder why it's so complicated. Why can't I just send an ICS 213 the way it's supposed to be? Why do we have all these other forms? Why is there something called encapsulation? What's this all about? We're going to talk about all of that very quickly. The first thing is to remember that the point of all of this is communication, the ability for a message to get from one place to another. Where you have two people who are engaged in some activity and able to talk directly to one another, there is no need, obviously, for phones, for radios, and so on. When you move them further apart, there then becomes a need for them to talk with one another, and if they are able to talk directly, and they have a direct path to one another, then they can talk just as if they were physically together. When you have a situation where communications have to be shared with many people along the same line, then you start running into issues of making sure that you can direct the message to the right place. When you have a situation where you need to be sure that the message is captured as you're going along, then you might want to record things. You might want to write them down. And that's what we commonly find when we're working in a disaster response situation. Let's talk about messaging just briefly. When we're talking about messaging, it's not different from when we're working in an office or wherever we're going about our business. It might be that if we need to get something to somebody, we could just walk right up to them and say, here's what I'm looking for. On the other hand, if that person's on the phone or somehow engaged, but we want to give them something and it can wait a couple of minutes, we might just write them a note and we can hand them that note. Bob, get lunch for everyone. I want a club sandwich. This is all we've got to give him. It's directed to Bob, and I've signed it M. That's enough information for Bob to know what this is about, to know whom it's from, and to be able to respond to it. There is no need for any fancy form here. On the other hand, if we have something else besides the message, maybe there's something that we want to give to somebody, maybe it's private, maybe it's several pages that are all put together, maybe it's a flash drive or some other physical object. We might use something more complicated. We might use an envelope. We might actually say, hey, this is for you. It's hand delivered. We're going to put the person's name on it. But that's all we need to do. Because it's hand delivered, we don't need to put a whole bunch of extra fancy stuff on here. Now, if we take it a step further, we might decide that, we've got to get this to another floor in the building or something along those lines. And in that case, we might use something like this, the inter-office mail system. And so we'll have this thing and we just basically take, wherever this was going, we scratch that out right down to the next person. It's going to Matthew in the lab. Okay, there's a person who's going to physically move this object around, and then it will go to the lab, and then it will go to Matthew. That was all of the information necessary for it to get routed to the right place, to be able to open it up. Oh, here's what I needed. Thank you very much. Now, if we're going further than that, if we have somebody else involved, or it's going at a distance where it's not just the inter-office mail person who's able to move the object around, we might get into something a little bit more complicated. We might write a letter. So in this case, we would write a letter. We could put somebody's information on it. Here's their name and their address and so on. Here's the information that they need. But if we put this in the mail just as it is, even if we put a stamp on it, it's not really going to go anywhere. We're probably going to be pretty disappointed with the result. And that's the reason for standardized envelopes, where we're going to have the name, we're going to have the company, we're going to have a street address, and that's going to include also a city, a state, and a zip code to be able to make sure that the message can get to the right place. When we are taking something and putting it into something else for the purpose of being able to move over that circuit, over that route, then what we are doing is taking a message and we are encapsulating it. That is, we are taking the message that is in the one format and we are placing it inside of something that is appropriate for the format where this needs to traverse so that it will be able to get to the right place. The same thing is true whether we're taking something like this and we're sticking it into the interoffice mail. It is the process of encapsulation. The same thing is true if it's hand carried. On the other hand, where we are making that direct connection, there is no need for encapsulation. So the whole point with a message is to make sure that it is understandable to the person who's going to get it, but also to make sure that we are putting it in the right format so that it will be able to go over the line, the path, the circuit in such a way that it will get to the right place, to the right person, so that when the right person gets it, the right person can make sense of it. That's all that encapsulation is about. That's what radio messaging is fundamentally about, and that's why radio operators need to understand radio message formats. All right, so let's say you've got yourself an ICS 213. Somebody's handed this to you as a radio operator, and you're supposed to get it from one place to another. Well, you can tell from this form, it's structured as an internal office memorandum. You can just move this thing around. You know who sent it and you know where it's going. But what you do not have is the routing information or the accounting information necessary to keep track of how it is moving along a path that is something besides hand carry or something besides what's going to be addressed when people have direct communication. By taking a message like this and putting it into a radio message that has a preamble that includes things like the number, the precedence, the station of origin, and so on, that's going to give us the ability to see to it that it gets routed to the right place. And that's exactly the same thing as taking a message and simply putting it into the right envelope so that it will be able to go over the circuit or the path necessary for it to get to where it needs to go. Take a look at other options that we have for you in this channel for understanding different radio message formats, and we'll have additional videos coming up in the future. Meanwhile, I look forward to hearing from you if you have questions. This is Radio KD8TTE out.